I'm never going to have 250,000 followers on Instagram, and that's okay. Nobody in my experience of putting this book out said anything to me about, like, your social media sucks.
My name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author and a best-selling book coach.
And I'm Fran Hauser. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, and a publishing strategist. These How I Did It conversations will inspire listeners to claim their own authority mindset and turn the story they can't stop telling into a book the world needs to read.
This is Bookbound, the podcast, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. Are you worried that you don't have a big enough platform to get a publishing deal, let alone at a Big Five publisher? Well, you're not alone. That's what we hear over and over again from agents and editors. And yet our guest, Rachel Somerstein, an associate professor of journalism at SUNY New Paltz, got a deal with a Big Five publisher to write her book, Invisible Labor, The Untold Story of the Cesarean Section, with a modest platform and no social media to speak of. Join us for this incredible conversation about what it takes to get a deal in today's crowded market. And no, it's not to have a big platform. You just have to have a great idea. Let's dive in. Hey, Rachel, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited to talk to you about your amazing book, Invisible Labor, The Untold Story of the Cesarean Section. We like to start every interview with a similar kind of a question. And then we're going to get into it a little bit more with you because we're really intrigued because you already wrote about it in the book a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about how you knew that this thing that was happening in your life, it happened in your life, was not just something that you had to deal with, perhaps a trauma, but also a book.
So I had been working on a different project, and I write about this in the book a little bit. And I had this moment of total clarity where I was like, why am I doing this other project? The most important thing that has ever happened to me was my C-section. And not just because, I became a parent, which is for me was like this transformative experience as it is for most people, but how I became a parent. So I get to this point where I was like, I need to pay attention to that and I need to write about that. So I wrote an essay first. And then as I was reading more about C-sections, I was like, oh, there's a lot here that's far more compelling than simply my own experience. And that's how I knew it was a big project.
That's so good. A lot of our listeners and students wonder, they have an idea, a story they can't stop telling, which is how we like to talk about it, but they're not sure if it's a book. And what you did was you wrote an essay about it, which is such a good thing to do. To test the idea to see if you're interested. But I love what you said, that you realized that there's a lot more to it than even what you knew. And so then you knew that it was a book. So that's a great teaching for people.
Yeah, thanks. And also I realized I should say that I knew I didn't want to write a memoir. That wouldn't have been the right thing for me as a genre. And I was even more interested in C-sections as a procedure and what they could reveal about, let's say, the United States, than in writing about my own healing process, which a different writer might have a different feeling about that, right? But that's how I felt as the author.
Yeah, that's so important because, again, so many of the people who we work with are at that exact crossroads. They have a topic and they're not sure if it's a memoir, and they might even get pressure from agents or editors to tell it one way or another. So tell us, was that ever an issue? Was it a question? Did people ask you to do it one way or another? Talk to us about that.
It was not an issue. On the first draft, I gave a copy of the first draft to a couple of very close friends. And one of them, my closest friend from college, was like, you need to put more of yourself in here. At first I was like, And then I thought, she and I have very similar reading habits, what would be like an ideal book. And even though she had very different birth experiences than I did, I really paid attention to that. And I should say, for me, if I had been pressured to be more memoirish, this might sound like a funny thing to say because I write about this personal stuff in the book, but I'm very private about certain things in my life. And I was very clear about what I would not write about. I fortunately was not in the position where I had to say, no, I won't do that. I didn't have that much space to bend.
So you wrote the essay and then you realized, okay, there's a book here. What did you do next? Did you have an understanding of how book publishing works? Did you know that, oh, okay, now I need to write a book proposal. I need to get an agent. Tell us about that.
I really didn't know that much. I have an MFA, but I studied fiction. So I knew more about writing a novel and trying to get that published, for which you have to have the whole manuscript done. And with writing a proposal, I was like, I don't even know where to begin. And so I asked a couple of friends who had written nonfiction books if they would share their proposals with me, and they were very generous, and they did. And that gave me a map. I see now what I would say to somebody and what I have told people who are asking me, like, how did you do it? It's a genre, just like a service piece is a genre, or a recipe is a genre, a proposal is a genre. And so I did my best to copy the genre while making it like this is my own book.
That's brilliant. It is definitely a genre. It's also an art.
It really was an artful document to figure out, like, what's the terrain of this book, and also to wrap my mind around, like, this is a book and it's not essays. It's a book with a narrative arc. And then I should say, in terms of finding an agent, I also had friends who shared their agent contacts with me, which was very generous. But the way I found my agent ultimately was through a conference. And I am extremely lucky because she's a great fit.
Oh, that's so cool. So do you mind sharing the conference?
Sure, it was the CLMP conference. They had this sort of like speed dating thing with agents. This was in 2020. It was remote, it was virtual. You had to pay to be in the conference. It was like $300. And it was like a dare for me to myself, because it was like, okay, if you're really serious about doing this book, then like go for it, like put some skin in the game kind of thing. And also that meant that I had to, more than the financial investment, I had to prepare something real to talk about in these meetings, as opposed to this thing that was like in my head and kind of really solidify my elevator pitch. So I'm lucky that this agent, it wasn't right away that she wanted to work with me, but ultimately we did want to work together. But really it was forcing me to like put myself, I don't know, in a place where I could articulate my project.
Right? Because like when you're all by yourself working on it versus now you're accountable to someone and you have a timeline and you have deadlines, and which is such a good thing. You have a forcing mechanism, right? Which is so good. So Rachel, you brought up comps before. One of the things that I'm really curious to learn more about is that there doesn't seem to be like a huge number of books out there about C-sections. So was that a positive or a negative when you were pitching the book?
Yes, I really appreciate you asking that, because on the one hand, there was no other book about C-sections. On the other hand, some publishers felt, who was going to buy it? Which is the challenge, I think, and I think you both know far better than I do, but from what I can understand, is the challenge of writing something that is not totally reinventing the wheel. There's books about pregnancy and pregnancy complications and for infertility and pregnancy loss, but so it fits within that group, but it's a different kind of a take. And I think that it was challenging for my agent to show publishers that, no, there really is an audience for this. And that being said, I mean, it went at auction, like there were multiple interests, which is wonderful. And the initial level of interest and meetings did not translate into like this place, this place. And it wasn't, from the feedback my agent gave me, it wasn't because of, well, we don't think this is that well baked, or, well, we don't think she can do it, or she's not the right person. It was really, they were concerned about audience.
I have so many questions. Well, so first of all, I want to know, because this is something that comes up a lot. How do you build, you can use your comps section to really artfully build a case for your book. So tell us how you did that.
So my agent really guided me to also expand my notion of comps to include, for instance, health justice books. I had not seen that, and it was really insightful. And I now see that. And to her credit, one of the first editors to respond with a lot of excitement about the book did not have children, did not plan to have children, but responded to it from a health justice angle. And I think that was key to showing that there's an audience, not only from the way I was thinking about it as an author, right, of like, let's say mothers with a particular set of experiences, but broadly speaking, because it's what the book really does, right? This is like real. It's not wishful thinking about what the book could be, but that, we have to think about, let's say for C-sections, they're practiced disproportionately on Black women compared with white women. That's a whole area about which there's a lot written, right? Like disproportionate health impacts that the book could speak to as well.
Oh, I just love that. I love that positioning. Like positioning is just, it's everything.
Yeah. And it also showed she really got the book.
Because you didn't want to go memoir-y and, like prescriptive and all that kind of stuff. I mean, not that you'd write a prescriptive memoir about C-sections, but people get so stuck in a loop about wanting certain things out of books because that's what's hot or trendy. And so I love that you were clear, you found an agent who got it and figured out how to make it happen so that you ended up with an auction, it was a book at auction, and you got a deal.
Yeah, I'm so fortunate, and it doesn't always work like that. Yeah, I'm really grateful that not only she got it, the acquiring editor got it too. And I think that the team I worked with understood earlier than I did what the book could be in terms of also like it says something about America. It's like I'm using the most common operation in the world and one of the most common operations in the United States to understand our culture better and our history. And I wanted to do that and I could not have articulated it at the proposal point. So they really saw that. And so, that's like the luck of the team.
Well, it's so great because what you're saying is that you had this proposal that you worked really hard on, but it wasn't even there yet.
I should say also my agent helped me a lot with the proposal. That was a really long process. My proposal was in decent shape when I sent it out to people, including her, and then we revised it over a long period, probably about 5 months before she took it out to sale. And when I go look at it now, the book has changed since then too, and it's deeper and better researched. It was much better than what I had done on my own because of her vision.
It's just so wonderful to have an agent who's a true partner, and who's really pushing you and helping you sharpen. So much of it is like the sharpening of it and just making it more compelling and, really thinking about it, thinking about the book as, of course, there's the art piece, but there's also the business piece. And so how do we create this proposal that's like really marketable, like gets agents or that gets editors like really excited? So when you find an agent who's willing to do that with you, it's everything. When you were talking about writing the book, who were you picturing as who was the muse? Like who were you picturing as the reader of the book? Because you have this like mom piece and then you have like the health justice piece. So I'm really curious about like who were you writing it for?
So in the beginning, I was thinking of people like me who'd had an unplanned pregnancy complication, right? Which could be a C-section. It could be something else that is really not pictured in the mass media. Like that was a big thing for me when I was postpartum. I'm like, where are the C-section stories? People like they're so common, but I don't see any of them. And that was very isolating for me. So I was thinking about moms in a similar position. As I was reporting, I also started thinking about providers. I felt my own empathy and kind of like understanding of the ecosystem of birth and medicine, it grew, really expanded. And I started thinking about what it would be like to be in a provider's shoes, meeting a mom for the first time and seeing, let's say, some clinical signs or something and how the provider would respond. So I really opened up and health justice issues too, right? Let's say what it's the difference of a provider meeting me, and I'm white skin, I'm a middle class person, I'm married, you can tell from my ring, versus a provider meeting somebody like a woman of color who's maybe, you know, in her early 20s, right? Doesn't appear to be partnered, maybe is on public insurance. Even a provider who doesn't think of themselves as racist might have implicit biases, right? Or they wouldn't relate, right? I don't relate in the same way or something like that. So I was thinking about how I could invite readers in, all of those readers, right? The younger mom of color or the older mom of color, the white middle class woman, the provider into this conversation about birth. And I think that made it for a better book because I wanted to be fair. And if I'm going to invite everybody in, I need to be fair, which means imagining this experience, these stories from all these different perspectives, even though the book is much more focused, I think, on the birthing person's perspective because I'm not a clinical provider.
We hear so much about platform and first time writers or second time writers. We get really worried about it and wrapped up in it. And, I love a story like yours. You're not a big social media person. If someone just looked at your quote platform from what they could see, there's not a whole lot there. And yet you got a deal, a big 5 deal. You wrote a book that's been really well reviewed on NPR, et cetera. Tell us about your understanding of platform.
So I love this question because I was a little bit worried when I started working on the book proposal. Like I thought I didn't have a platform, but I was wrong. I wish I'd understood that better. But, I am also a professor. I have young children. What I didn't see that I do have that's part of my platform is a lot of experience public speaking. I've been at my institution for a decade, but I've been in higher ed. First, I was a part-time instructor for 17 years. I'm really used to explaining things to people, and I'm really used to listening and hearing people's questions. And that proved advantageous with interviews, and it's since proving advantageous with different kinds of events I'm being asked to do. But when I was reading about platform, that was like not part of the platform that I recognized or my contacts in higher ed. And then the other thing that I had that I didn't recognize is, I've been doing journalism for 20 years. I used to write about art, I wrote about culture. I started writing about maternal mistreatment in about 2018, so not that long ago. But I did have a lot of contacts, and that isn't exactly part of my platform in the sense of I wouldn't send them my book and be like, can you make a big deal about my book on social media? But I am able to ask them for advice. And I think that that's part of a platform too. How do I be strategic? I'm never going to have 250,000 followers on Instagram, and that's okay. Another writer can, and that works for them. Realistically, I do have to get better at social media too. So I can also recognize like the weaknesses, but nobody in my experience of putting this book out said anything to me about like, your social media sucks. I was like, what should I be doing? And, publisher, my editors were like, well, you might want to clean this up or clean that up, make sure your website's good to go. Even if I'd put a huge amount of time into trying to build a platform over the course of 6 months, A, it might not have worked. B, it clearly wasn't where my heart was. And C, it wasn't my strength.
This is music to my ears. It's really sending a message to so many people who have amazing books in them, people like you, people in academia, people who are journalists, people who have an amazing story to tell. This platform thing has become such a barrier, and it's just not true. Now, if you want like a huge financial thing and, but even that, like more and more, I'm finding that that is not even true necessarily. And the inverse also, you can have a huge platform and not get a good deal. Or even worse, you have a huge platform, you get a huge deal, and your book tanks and no one wants to touch you ever again.
Right. And that there's a difference. I think I said this to my publicist a few times. I didn't understand the assignment when it came to publicity in the beginning. And partly that's because I'm in a different industry, a non-commercial industry. And partly it's like, I never did this before, so I didn't know. But you can still play a really important role in publicity, even without a huge platform. Like publicity isn't just posting on social media. That can be part of it, and it should be. I think if I'd let my platform hold me back, I would be really sorry.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that your agent and nobody even talked about it. We've had a couple interviews with really great authors who said the same thing. I think we're moving in that direction. I think a year ago, that we might not have heard that so much, especially in like more literary, more scientific, more research based, the prescriptive nonfiction world, I think still requires a little bit more, but who knows? Hey, Bookbound Ones, if you're loving this interview as much as we are, we think you'll want to join us for this very special, first of its kind, Read Like a Writer book club. What the heck is a Read Like a Writer book club? I'm so glad you asked. This idea came to us after working with so many aspiring authors who were still reading books like a reader, liking this, not liking that, instead of studying successful books for lessons in how to weave their own stories into clear structures or develop frameworks that really change people's lives. And we thought, hey, why leave so much learning on the table? Then we realized that we have this incredible archive of author interviews. Yes, this very podcast. And so we put it all together and said, hey, let's host a Read Like a Writer book club. This is how it works. For the low price of $175, we'll meet once a month over Zoom for 7 months. Our meetings will take place on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time. We'll give you a list of books, related podcast episodes to review, and a simple reading guide. We'll meet up and discuss together and in small groups. Fran and I are so excited to get started. We love reading, we love you guys, and we love studying books with other women. Sign up at bookboundpodcast.com/club. We can't wait to see you there.
I think just debunking this whole misconception that platform equals social media. It's just not true. It's so much bigger than that. I would love to ask you, I mean, you talk about being a professor and being a mom and, doing all the things. How did you make the time to write?
I started the proposal in the winter-ish of 2020. I had a new baby. My son was born in June 2020. And I worked that proposal nights and weekends, frankly. And I should say that I was fortunate. I'd already earned tenure, so I didn't need to be doing traditional peer-reviewed scholarship. I could be working on this instead, but I was still teaching and caring for my family and just being a human. I took 1 year of sabbatical from my job to devote to it, and that still wasn't long enough. So I would work early in the morning. I would work at night. I would work on a weekend. I would work weekend days. And it really meant saying no to a lot of things. And that was hard and sometimes I think disappointing to my children. They would come and see me. I have a little office upstairs in our house, and they'd be wanting to hang out. And I'd say, okay, we can hang out for a minute, but I really have to do this. And I think because I really believed in this book, that was how it was possible. Otherwise, I would have been why am I missing out on so many fun summer days? I was thinking this summer I'm still working a lot because of the book promotion, but I can go away for the weekend and really spend time hanging out. I can turn my computer off at 9 o'clock and be done. And thinking back to platform and all of this, I mean, it's in the end, you still have to write your book. You know what I mean? And you have to really want to write the book you're writing. Otherwise, I think it would just be punishing.
Right, because so many other things need to get sidelined. So it's a really big decision.
And, a very good friend of mine gave me this advice in the beginning. She was like, you can't do your book and do other things. And at the time I was like, I can do my book and other things. Maybe other people can't, but I can. I am this master of doing everything at the same time. And I was so naive, and she was completely right. And I didn't do any other journalism. I didn't do any other, traditional scholarship. I couldn't do anything else. It wasn't actually possible. I didn't decorate my house. You know what I mean? All these other projects, fun projects, was just this will be later. I didn't work on my garden that much, that's okay. That was just a different season.
And when a book is really taking over, that's a good thing. We want that as writers, as authors. That's the unconscious saying, this is the right project. So if that's not happening, I think it's absolutely, like you said, it would be very punishing.
And how would you finish it? I mean, I really think I've spoken to a few people who are in the middle right now, and it's yeah, if you don't want this book, how will you get it done? And it was to your point, it was a pleasure, I have to say, Bethany. It was I said no to a lot of things. I was very negative response, but it was a total pleasure. Doing the research was so fun. Sometimes it was very frustrating to write, but I really enjoyed working on the project.
The title is so brilliant. Invisible Labor. Was that always the title?
No, it wasn't. Originally, the title was The Cut, and that's how it sold. And then later, my publisher was like, we're concerned this is a bit visceral and on the nose. What else could you do? And the assistant editor I was working with, Rachel Somerstein at Echo, who's totally brilliant, she came up with the idea for Invisible Labor. And that's what we used. And it was so smart. And it also shows how, like, when you have a great team, the results are so much better than what you could do on your own. And I should say, like, one thing I think that's important about my journey is that the person who acquired my book left the imprint and halfway through the process, and I was not able to go with her. And instead, my agent guided me to a different imprint, to Echo, with an editor who had initially wanted the book, but ultimately wasn't able to make that happen. And I was really nervous about that because I had one relationship with the acquiring editor who really believed in it, and the move was fantastic. I really think that it's because first part of it is good fortune, right? They were able to take me on, and it was still within HarperCollins. But also my agent really knows the industry, and she's really smart about, like, this could be good. This could be a good move. So in a way, I feel like I got the best of both worlds. I got to work with the acquiring editor who had this understanding and vision, and then I got to work with my editors at Echo who also had an understanding and vision that was complementary to what the initial editor had seen or suggested.
Yeah, no, that's so good because I think people don't understand, you get the deal and then, the anxiety still persists. There are so many twists and turns, so many surprises, so many challenges. But it sounds like you had such a wonderful guide. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. And I should say one other thing I wanted to say about how I got it done. I think this is really important is that I made a schedule for myself of deadlines. So I was like, I need to finish, let's say, chapters 4, 5, and 6. They have to be done by the end of the year. And there came a point where I was like, I'm running a little behind, but only by a couple of weeks. This is good. When it became clear to me I couldn't make my initial deadline, I asked for an extension. So making the deadlines, being realistic about when I could or could not meet them, and realizing when I could not meet them, it wasn't my fault. I was like, I see now how long this is taking me. I can't make it happen any faster. I need another 6 months. And then I really was like, okay, there's no more extensions. I need to really have my schedule and follow it.
It's so good. And Bethany, you made me think about something earlier when you were talking about, you get the deal and then there's still the anxiety. You have to write the book. One of the things that I didn't realize as a first-time author was that you don't get paid the advance all at once. Like you get 25% and then you get your second 25% when the manuscript is accepted. I never even understood, like, oh, wait a second. Like, so the publisher could say that they don't like the manuscript and not accept it, right? And then you get the third 25% when, the hardcover comes out and then the final when the paperback. Like, I just wanted to add that in because we've never talked about that on the podcast. And this idea of like, no, you're not getting the whole advance up front.
And the way it worked for me was I asked for half upfront because I was going on 1 year of half salary. It still wasn't enough to cover all of my expenses for the book. And then they did the second two, they split them, one on acceptance and one on publication of the hardcover copy. But on acceptance, I thought that would be, here's my first draft. I turned in my first draft the end of May of last year. We had to go through the legal read, and I didn't receive that accepted payment until January.
Can you describe for our listeners what the legal read is?
Oh, sure. So the lawyers from my publisher went through the book and basically read it with the eye of what could be litigated and asked me to make a couple of changes to make certain things less identifiable. And there were certain cases I wrote about that didn't pertain to me that we kept an eye on. And that came at the very, very end when there were not going to be any other significant changes. And I really was happy to have somebody do that because I'm not looking to initiate any legal recourse from this book.
Okay, so Rachel, right now you are in the thick of marketing and promotion. Like, how is that feeling for you?
It's like a roller coaster. Parts of it are really fun. I love talking about the book. I really loved actually this conversation, like talking about the mechanics, because I think it's so useful and interesting. And I've heard from some readers these really meaningful, amazing notes and questions. And so that is wonderful. The heat of it has passed a little bit in terms of I'm not doing the pitching. I was doing a lot of pitching and now I'm pitching a lot less. And I'm a little relieved because it felt very, very urgent. It's a lot of work. I did not anticipate that. So, one thing that's been a lot of work is, I've written a couple of pieces, like companion pieces. That's been challenging. And then also, what's surprisingly challenging is I'm also doing some short reported pieces, and I haven't done anything like that in a long time. And that takes a special kind of energy, even though I'm going back to some sources I know. I'm a very thorough reporter. So I'm not just sort of like recycling. And it's a lot to be like, I'm pitching some stuff, I'm doing promotion, I'm reporting, I'm writing some personal stuff, I'm doing interviews for Substacks, starting those too. Like, it's just a lot of different things. And I'm learning, and I'm like, what do I like? That is different than being behind the desk. Do I like a meet and greet? Do I like doing an event? What kind of event do I like to do? Who do I want to be in conversation with? Now people are asking about, different lectures and stuff in the fall. And I'm like, this is going to be a lot of work and a lot of time putting my energy out. And I'm also working on developing my next book idea. So that is exciting, but I can't tend to that in the way that I would otherwise. And like, these are great problems to have. Like, I'm so happy that I have a lot to do. It's awesome.
Well, it is. It's exciting because there's so much opportunity.
Yeah, and you don't even see that before the book comes out. Like, oh, there's this person's interested in doing a podcast. Oh, that's interesting. Or different people will reach out and be like, can we have a conversation? And you partly want to say yes to everybody, and also you're excited and people are excited. And then, like, I've had a lot of people who are probably like 2 or 3 degrees separated from me, like, ask a friend of a friend if they can talk about the publishing process. I want to demystify it. Like, I'm very open about money, about stuff. Like, we should talk about this. And I also realized, I'm like, I actually can't say yes to every person because I actually just don't have time.
Well, that's why we love this podcast so much, because everybody wants to have the same conversation. Really, really interesting for people who want to become writers. And it's very opaque, it's very mysterious. And for us, bookish nerds, we could talk about this all day. So, are you going to tell us a little hint about what the next book is?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in doing something sort of similar about the history of herbalism. So I think about how herbal remedies are very popular, and particularly among women, to address issues that the pharmaceutical industries don't address. And on the other hand, these things are not like, they can't actually be standardized, right? Like, that's sort of the way herbal medicine works. And so it's hard to run clinical trials. So is there evidence that it's really effective, or is it just placebo, or is it wishful thinking? And then there's also like the element of buying snake oil, right? Like, we don't want to be taken advantage of, but grounded a little bit in my experience of, after my son's birth, my second child in 2020, I developed like a chronic mastitis, which is like a chronic infection, breast infection, and I couldn't stop making milk enough to wean him. I was hospitalized for antibiotic resistant mastitis. And I went to see this doctor and I was like, is there a pill I can take to just like turn off the milk? Like, what can I do? And she was like, no. And actually, most of the research into mastitis is among cows, right? Because they produce milk for sale. It's very little research on humans and mastitis,
Women specifically.
right? And the research about breast milk is usually about like, you're underproducing, like, this lens of inadequacy as opposed to overabundance, which is a problem. And I couldn't believe it. In the end, I used things that were, there's some evidence for them, but it was like this like kind of weird concoction of like traditional Chinese medicine and sage and working with a lactation consultant. And I was like, it's easy to also lose your perspective of what's real when you're going through something like this.
That's amazing. I love a writer's mind. I just love, when you're in the thick of something. And like you said, like, you don't always know how real is this because I'm in it. To just like watch the threads. Oh, that's so exciting and delightful.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh my goodness. So Rachel, as we wrap up, and I feel like we could talk to you for forever, Is there one piece of advice that you can share with our listeners, especially people that are listening that have an idea for their first book and they're not really sure what to do? Maybe they're feeling a little bit stuck.
I think that writing an essay is probably the best thing. Or maybe it's a piece of reportage that would resemble the kind of thing you might want to do, because then you will first see if there's a there for yourself and for a market. And it'll give you a chance to get familiar with some of the ideas and the people in the landscape of your book, potentially. And then it would, if you decide to develop the book proposal, it gives you something you can send out with your proposal that shows, I can do this. I have done it. Take a look.
And people are reading it. Right. You're validating the idea. You're right.
Exactly. And here's my voice, right? Here's my way of writing about this. And here are the kinds of people I'm going to bring in as sources, and how I'm going to structure it, and the ideas. And I think that also that can make it seem, the process of writing a book, less intimidating, because then you can, remind yourself, like, I'm doing this again, but on a much bigger scale.
Well, right. Because an essay is it's lower stakes, it's lower effort, it's lower energy, it's all of that. And at the same time, you're getting all of this amazing feedback, right? And also seeing like, okay, I really think there's a lot more here. This can be a book. So I love that as a first step. We're so grateful to you. Thank you for making the time to be with us. I feel like I learned so much. I'm sure that our listeners are going to learn a ton as well. And what's the best way, Rachel, for everyone to stay connected with you?
So you could go to my website, which is just my name, rachelsomerstein.com, and you can sign up for a newsletter, which I'm going to send out, not to spam people, but just to be like, here's where I'm going to be over the next few months. And I am posting on Instagram and Twitter, so you can look there too. But probably my website and a newsletter is the best way.
Amazing. Well, thank you, and best of luck with the second book. We're excited.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Bookbound.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
Please visit us at bookboundpodcast.com for more on us and how we work with authors.